My name is Mike. I'm a professor for social management, and you are listening to Managing Around, the podcast about social sciencing and magic managing. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Managing Around, the bi-weekly podcast about social science, culture, and management. Machiel Keestra's essay from 2017, Metacognition and Reflection by Interdisciplinary Experts, Insights from Cognitive Science and Philosophy, should be considered a must-read, but the very nature of this essay makes its content relatively inaccessible to the layperson. And in today's episode 14, we will summarize this essay with some additional thinking so that you may learn more about the fascinating topic of metacognition. First, we will start with a little bit context. Is expertise disadvantageous, especially when it comes to experts from multiple domains collaborating with each other? Ultimately, this is the question that members of the cognitive sciences and philosophy have attempted to answer with this or the other paper. The theory is that, interestingly, experts make more biased decisions than their novice counterparts. They are inflexible and fixated on particular methods. Our goal is to combat these challenges through the use of metacognition and philosophical reflection, effectively allowing experts to prepare for interdisciplinary understanding and integration. Benefits lie on the hand, and of doing that, they can consider more options, learn from others, improve their flexibility, increase the chances of success, and they are able to identify and mitigate risks very early in the process of thinking. Second, let's define expertise. I quote from Keestra's essay, page 121. Compared to beginners in a field, experts have assembled a much larger set of representations that are also more complex, facilitating fast and adequate perception in responding to relevant situations. End of quote. It is more than just a person's individual skill. It also incorporates their circumstance, taking into account education, job role, and many more. Expertise, then, is an indicator of the time someone has spent learning and applying that learning. We will refer to this collective experience as the so-called mental representation from here on. That brings us to our third point today about learning and knowledge acquisition. Mental representations, as we have defined before, change not only for the purposes of adapting to one's external environment, but also for accommodating the introduction of new information, which is typically accumulated through physical and personal experiences by way of academic advising. Over time, some of these mental representations may overlap, but may not necessarily be relevant to the situation or the topic. Just as well, several mental representations can present themselves in relation to a single situation, entity, or topic. I quote from the text, page 126. We can represent one and the same object or phenomenon and its determining factors in many different ways. End of quote. Fourth, overcoming the pitfalls in collaborative working between experts. Team-based projects offer increased opportunities to both to learn and to fail. I quote from the text, page 124. It is obvious that collaborations among people with differing interdisciplinary expertise is difficult, partly due to the cognitive and metacognitive processes involved. With other words, these difficulties that can arise in team-based projects can result in misunderstandings and disagreements that impact the success rates of projects. An example is whereby one expert might not adequately explain something from their discipline to the experts of the other domains, as they think it is obvious, failing to see that it is only obvious to them. With other words, the resolution to this issue does not necessarily start at the group level, but rather it must first be resolved at the individual level. Through focusing on the individual's cognition, the resulting component effect leads to team cognition and effective team collaboration. I quote from the text again, page 123. In addition to monitoring and regulating their own mental representations, the members of such a team need to communicate and cooperate their cognitive efforts with those of their collaborators. Fifth, about the individual cognition and pluralism. I quote from the text again, page 123. We can observe in almost every such academic domain a methodological and theoretical pluralism, since the investigation of almost every object or phenomenon requires the application of different methods, yielding different theoretical accounts. End of quote. What this means is that the sharing of insights from one domain to the other can be and generally is beneficial to the learning of all parties, and that a willingness to learn improves the project's chances of success. Sixth, expertise is a kind of performance. When experts learn, they typically develop far more complex mental representations than novices, and throughout their lives will develop processes that affect their performance. This is because as the expert ages and learns more, they adjust, redefining and relearning things. Subsequently, they are integrating their learnings into mental representations, creating one that is unique from other experts. An example of this is a child learning from and responding to feedback from an adult. Let's now come to the seventh and the main point of the article. Metacognitive skills. Metacognition is to observe, monitor, and regulate one's own cognitive capabilities in relation to oneself and others. As we all improve our metacognitive skills throughout our lives, there is a resultant increase in the success chances of team tasks and projects. I quote from the text from page 135. An additional target of these skills can also be the environment in which an expert has to perform. Removing obstacles or developing facilitating structures can help to improve outcomes or ease the task itself, for example. End of quote. Eighth, the text also talks about metacognitive alertness and mental weakness. Surely, then the expert is well equipped to handle complex tasks, situations, and projects in comparison to the beginner. But this is not necessarily the case, however, as it is arguable that experts tend to perform poorly or are quick to assume a solution or a problem in comparison to the beginner. This is partly prompted by how heavily experts rely on their established mental representations, which results in prejudiced or fixed decisions. There's also the potential that the expert's own sense of self or ego factors into his or her poor performance. The expert's denial of alternative solutions may not necessarily be due to the fact that he or she simply does not perceive the alternatives. I quote from the text again, page 134. Overly confident in recognizing a particular situation and allowing the response that is associated with the situation's mental representation to be executed, an expert may overlook a relevant but novel detail. End of quote. Ninth, experts should utilize philosophical reflection. For this context, philosophical reflection is interpreted as, I quote from the text, the epistemological and ontological but also normative assumptions that have shaped the focus of those in a field on some causes and factors and not others. End of quote. This includes model preferences, detail relevance, and best methods or practices. Through reflection on these assumptions and the models and preferences and so on, in a philosophical manner, the expert is able to identify these assumptions and analyze the underlying principles that influence them. How these assumptions are influenced further reveal the nature behind an expert's complex representations. It is recommended that experts utilize philosophical reflection to improve their performance and creative problem solving, since philosophical reflection, and I quote from the text, appears indeed to be a natural ally to metacognition, given that both entail a second-order activity or reflection, requiring individuals not to take their own thinking and thoughts for granted, but to critically scrutinize them. End of quote from page 141. And now let's come to our last point, team cognition. Metacognition is as important for individuals as well as for the team. Teams need to learn to recognize, communicate, and resolve their differences early on to ensure aligned team working. And one way of doing this is through metacognition. The application of metacognition within a team dynamic may ease the difficulties of individual cognition, as, and I quote again from page 151, research shows that metacognition in social settings can help to mitigate some of the challenges of individual metacognition. It can foster individual metacognition as each team member is confronted with the metacognitive self-reflection of others, receives feedback, and considers the self-regulation strategies of others. End of quote. Simultaneously, the individual and the team learn how to articulate and deliberate both individual and team mental representations. From there, the team is then able to further assess, evaluate, and adjust all mental representations in accordance with the needs and the requirements of the task or project. Alright, that's it for today, dear listeners. At the end, let's summarize the main and important learnings for today. First, the context. Experts make more biased decisions than their novice counterparts. Second, expertise refers to the collective experience as a mental representation. Third, mental representations change not only for the purposes, but also over time. Fourth, to overcome the pitfalls in collaborative working between experts, we need first to start at an individual level. Fifth, Sharing individual insights from one domain to the other can be and is always beneficial to the learning of all parties. 6. Expertise could be regarded as a performance. 7th, improving our metacognitive skills throughout our lives will result in higher success rates and chances for team collaborations. 8th, experts are sometimes overly confident in recognizing a particular situation and are sometimes in denial of alternative solutions. 9th, it is recommended that experts should utilize philosophical reflection to improve their performance and creative problem solving. And last but not least, 10th, teams need to learn to recognize, communicate, and resolve their differences early on in the process of collaboration. These are quite a few lessons learned today. I truly appreciate all your efforts to tune in my podcast for this episode. Please, if you liked this episode, don't forget subscribing to the podcast channel in your favorite podcast app, so you can stay up to date whenever we release a brand new episode on managing around. Stay safe, and we will see us on the next episode. If you liked this episode, please leave a review on the Apple's podcast website. If you are not using an iPhone, there's a link in the show notes. If you've got any ideas or thoughts on this episode, or if you've got an idea about new podcast topics or questions you'd like to discuss, send an audio file or voice note to hi@profmanagement.de. For any non-audio comments, drop a tweet or a DM to @profmanagement on Twitter, please. Thank you for listening and see you next time.